Let's get started. Thank you all so much for joining tonight. Welcome, Madeleine, our guest of honor. Thank you so much, Madeleine, for taking the time to spend with us in Appalachia. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, if that's okay.
Well, golly, don't waste any time, John. Thank you. Thank you all for having me. It is just really a pleasure to be here. And I've been doing a number of calls with the regions, and I like it so much better than our big calls. Our big calls are nice, you know, we all get together, but and you're on 2 screens now, so I can't quite see all of you, but it's way easier to feel some connection in these little bit smaller groups than in the great big ones. And I have been thinking of this a lot as a kind of ask me anything session. So I don't tend to say much because the richness comes from what you have to say and the comments you have and the questions you have and sometimes the answers you share with each other. So it's a very open-ended time. It is kind of fun for me to think about how much the context has changed over the last few weeks. The context remains change. There's lots of change. You know, there's change in our politics, there's change in CCL. You've got me here now instead of Mark, but I'm getting used to it. It's been almost 8 months. We're looking at where do we go next with carbon pricing? What are we adding strategically and carefully and thoughtfully to our policy portfolio? And that's a lot of change. And then earlier it was like, and we're really depressed because budget reconciliation is dead. And I thought to myself, well, at least like we know the context now of what got done and didn't done, and we can go ahead and make some decisions on that context. And then suddenly it changed again. And then I was like, how much hope do you have about that? You know? So Jen Tyler from our government affairs team, she says that she sees 0% chance that the House is going to fail to pass this thing. So that's pretty out there for somebody who works on the Hill. But I'm choosing to believe her. Okay, something could happen, something could go wrong. But I am planning the Saturday national call in the context of this bill has passed, and now where are we going? But immediately that call will be a lot focused on taking a little time to notice that happened and what it means. So I think I'll stop there and just go right into opening it up to see what you're thinking about at this time and what questions you have. And I don't always have answers, you know, but I always work on things and listen. And look at that, there's a hand already. John, one thing I'm going to say is it's up to you to figure out how you manage hands, people jumping in, or the chat. And it's also up to you to make sure we end when we're supposed to end, and like warn me to slow down because sometimes I get a little engaged.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. If you don't mind putting up your hand, raise your hand in the reactions button, and then we'll take you in order. George?
Yeah. Thanks for having this gathering and call, Madeleine. I did the Atlantic one too, so I'm taking 2 doses here from you. One before and one after the Senate passed the bill. So that's so exciting. We were tabling at the time it happened, our wonderful co-leaders of our chapter here, Fairfax County, at a big, huge farmers market in the city here outside of DC. So it was a huge mob, and they had a wonderful table set up. We had lots of people come by, lots of people sign up for CCL. One of the people that came by was a young man who's a student at NYU. He's 20 years old. He is a constituent. He lives in Portland, and he still votes from there. And he's a constituent of a Democrat there, Kurt Schrader. He knew his name. He didn't know the district number, but it's Oregon 5. I looked it up. And he said the newspapers there had articles saying that he was not necessarily on board with voting for this for the IRA, and so I said, well, if that's the case, you know, you've got a target on your back, because our CCL leadership has figured out a way to, you know, work in those states where they knew that was the case, and you're very key as a constituent. So he's, you know, he said, well, I definitely will be calling. I checked and I found a newspaper article that confirmed what he was saying. He lost his primary, and they made the point so the Democratic caucus has no leverage over him. There was a hint that he was piqued, that they didn't help him enough for his primary. And he had come out in August last year with a group of 9 that said, we'll never vote for the Build Back Better Act. Now, of course, that's not what we have now. We have a completely different act. So do we have a sense of how many there might be out there? I like what you heard from the Hill a lot better than what
I'm sure you do. Yeah. What I'm hearing, again, from our folks who are definitely keeping their ear to the ground, is that all of the Democratic members of the House that they had some concern about have expressed support for the bill. So that may have evolved since the weekend when you were tabling and reading that. And if you're really concerned, I would suggest you email Jen and raise that up specifically with her. But my understanding is that all of the Democratic members of the House have realized that this is the chance to get significant stuff done, even though it is not perfect. The other thing about the House that's slightly different from the Senate is there is a tiny little bit of margin there. So they could lose a member or two and still be okay.
Well, I like your answer a lot better, and there's nothing I don't think any of us as volunteers now can do about it. I don't know anybody else in Oregon to call, and this young man is energized to see who he can find, if anybody, who he went to high school with and stuff like that. Yeah. So, yeah, so we'll go with your answer.
All right.
Thank you.
Do that, and we will know before too much longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, George. Warren, go ahead.
Sure, Madeleine. Hi. Thank you for talking with us today. I want to pick up on your question or your statement early when you first came on about the future of policy, CCL, and you know, a lot of things I've been reading have been that carbon pricing has a very rough road to go for the future, because they've learned that people don't like sticks; they like carrots, and there are a lot of carrots in this new bill. But carbon pricing, as cap and trade in 2010, Wexler and Markey, was sort of viewed as a stick, and so I wonder what CCL's view of is the future of carbon pricing, or are these other policy ventures a way to sort of open up new frontiers for policy in CCL?
Yeah, this is on all our minds, Warren, including mine. So I am seeing the same stuff you're seeing, where there's a lot of conversation about, for example, the IRA has all carrots in it and there's no sticks in it, like a carbon price. And I'm like, cringe. It just makes me cringe, you know. And so one conversation that we have, that I opened up just this morning, but really not for the first time, is going forward. I do think it's hard to not like interrupt myself and back up in this conversation. So you'll just have to bear with me on that. We have pushed carbon fee and dividend beautifully for years, gotten it onto the national radar. Everybody knows what we stand for. Everybody now discusses it. It's not an invisible solution. And a number of people have endorsed it because of us in many ways. And some people now are like, it won't happen. It's impossible. It'll never happen. I think going forward, when we talk about carbon fee and dividend, we're going to have to do it in some different ways. And one of those that continues to pop up actually from our grassroots is when you say carbon fee, there's the stick. And when you say dividend, there's the carrot. And a lot of you have said, like, why don't we lead with the dividend? And so that's one question that I'm asking staff to seriously look at. What would it take to really rebrand it carbon cashback? These are things that take careful thought. So it's not like you're going to see anything next week, because doing that is a major undertaking. It's more likely to be like, what are we doing in the next Congress? That said, what currently has the most legs with the right side of the aisle in particular, but to some extent with Democrats, is this whole notion of starting with carbon border adjustment mechanisms. And I find that almost funny that the most technical, incomprehensible part of our three-legged stool would be the thing that looks like the path forward next year. But there are bills coming out on it, and it being done under the name of American competitiveness is opening ears where our Ernest, this is the third stool of the three-legged carbon fee and dividend climate solution stool, didn't reach them. So I think we'll be looking a lot with allies at that path forward. And yes, we always then bring up the question, where's the fee? Because we know you have to have a fee as part of that scheme. There's some debate about that, but the folks seriously looking at it may then have to seriously look at, okay, if I want this carbon border adjustment mechanism or this tariff, I'm going to have to then slide a fee into it to get it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the most likely path there. But the other part of your question is, yes, the reason why it's time to broaden our focus, and I'm starting to say strategically and carefully, it is so that we have more wiggle room in how we work with people, and can help that what Danny says, help Republicans walk faster in the right direction. And so already I'm finding that just by putting that out there, I can now have very productive conversations with, for example, some people in eco-right groups who aren't in favor of carbon pricing, mostly because they never saw it having any legs, and are really happy to work with us on where we might build bipartisan support for some other clean energy solutions or forests. And so whole new conversations, and I think you'll see this locally. So that's a kind of long answer, but it was a deep question you asked. So that's what you get.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Warren. And Madeleine, I don't know if you're able to monitor the chat as well, but there's some interesting.
I find that I can't keep my train of thought when I split my attention. So that's why you're monitoring it for me, Don.
Cool. Gotcha. Okay, Bill, you're next. Thanks, Warren.
Madeleine, I love the announcement that came out over CCL's community that Canadians were enjoying their first dividend checks. And that's not a bad thing to advertise widely in the US, particularly during the Ukraine war. There's a lot of hard feelings about the petroleum companies sort of taking advantage of the situation and charging more than they need to. And I think that to look at our carbon fee and dividend in the light of this, if the oil companies are going to charge so much for gas, then some of that profit needs to go back to the people. And so the tax or the fee on the carbon gives the money back to the people. And I'm thinking that the oil companies can't charge even more than they are getting away with, because then they just won't get the volume of business that they need. And so there is an upper limit, as what I'm saying. There is an upper limit of how much they can charge, say, for a gallon of gasoline. And that area, the profit, some of it needs to go back to the people. So I think that's a frame worth considering when we're talking about carbon fee and dividend. I also like the idea of leading with the dividend and saying that it's coming from charging the petrochemical companies.
Thanks for your thoughts, Bill. Going back to the first thing where you talked about Canada, I did have a little bit of pleasure in dropping Canada into a conversation with a foundation recently around their discouragement over the prospects of carbon pricing and all the places where it hadn't quite happened. And I was like, yes, and then there's Canada. So it is definitely good for us to keep Canada handy.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Mark, nice to see Virginia so well represented tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm from Reston, Virginia. And Madeleine, my thoughts here are that I was attracted to CCL because they had one objective, and it's very clear. And there's thousands of us, thousands of us all working in various ways toward that one objective. And I worry now that we have this victory here, that we may get unfocused and start performing various important things, but not focused on one. And I just think that as we celebrate what's going on now, that we announce what our next objective is, if it's still fee and dividend or what else, so that we remain focused. And personally, I think at this point, fee and dividend is just a little hard to swallow given all the monies that's already been appropriated for through the IRA. But I don't want to get off on what the right thing to do is. I think the important thing though is just that we that we stay focused and we kind of announce this is what we're all working towards.
Thanks, Mark. I share the worry about focus. Like we know how to be very, very tightly focused, and the risk in getting less tightly focused is that we go unfocused. Yeah. And that's why you heard me say strategic and careful. I have been saying, and not just me, and we will continue to do it because we need to do it over and over, is that, in all our interviews with experts and policymakers and organizations, nothing emerged that was a close second to the power of carbon fee and dividend. And that, we remain committed to that remains the top thing we want to get done. But it is strategic to open up a little bit so that, because the way forward is quite complicated. So trying to thread that needle. I'm sure it'll be a bit of a wavy needle. Yeah, or if you know it, we'll be weaving. I don't know how to say that. My metaphors are all screwed up now, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. It's going to be like a little too much this way and a little too much that way. And it's a little trial and error there. I finally found the word.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Mark. Evan, you're up.
Thanks. Hi, Madeleine. Sometimes I feel that the American public has the attention span for one thing at a time. And my fear is that after this bill is passed, that there'll be a collective feeling of, okay, good, we solved climate change. Great job, guys. Let's move on to the next thing. Is there any concern over Congress losing the appetite to address climate change in the next few sessions?
Yes, there is concern over it. And appetite is the word we're using. So for example, in our asking people to contact their Democratic members, many folks said, but I know mine's on board. And what we said was a good, strong showing in support of this will increase their appetite for more. And we're, and you know, and now it's like, that is my slogan for the rest of this year in particular, is our chief thing we need to do is increase their appetite for more. And that is through our election actions and through our media work and through the conversations we have. But it's going to be our job. And yes, they will be tempted, members of Congress and Democrats in particular, actually, will be tempted to sit back for a little bit unless we do that. The interesting thing is that with Republicans anticipating that they will take control of one or more of the chambers, you know, you're seeing a House Republican plan with 6 pillars, and it's short on details, but this is them getting ready for that. And the upside is it's a clear recognition that they know they have to deal with climate. And it might be that the you know, on the right side of the aisle, the appetite tends to be smaller than those of us who are climate alarmed appreciate. But the appetite, once they have some ability to put things forward, there is clearly signs that some appetite is there. So again, it's our job to increase that.
Thank you, Evan. Matt.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks, Madeleine. I think my original question has been answered about working with true believing Trump members of Congress about climate and going in the direction of talking about clean energy and jobs and so forth. I guess I'll phrase my question a little differently. We have 147 members of Congress who voted in some fashion or another to reject the results of a free and fair election based on the big lie. And I'm wondering how we can work in good faith with any member of Congress who took that stand, because if they can undo the results of an election, we have no democracy. And if we have no democracy, we have no meaningful hope for action on climate. And if the Republicans gain control of the House, the people in charge in the House are going to be people who foment the lie about the stolen election, the big lie. And I just find it, you know, I'm grateful that my member of Congress is not one of those, but could be replaced by someone who maybe is. And I just have a very hard time thinking about how I can work with someone who denies the essence of the democracy we need to solve the climate crisis.
Yeah, this is on a lot of our minds. And I appreciate that. And it's really challenging, especially if you have one of those members. So some of that is like people have to do individually what they need to do. One of the things I do want to point out is that they have not actually overturned the election, that as bad, awful, scary as that was, and as the situation remains, they have not done that. And so what from my conversations with folks on the right, I find myself more in touch than the average person with the folks on the right who share your worry and are trying to figure out how to get out of this pickle. Because it's a pickle, the way to put it very mildly or lightly, the way a share of the base is adamantly buying into the lie. but you're not alone on, those of you on the left who are concerned are not as alone as you feel in that concern about the lie and the future of that party. They don't look like they're winning the internal struggle that's going on. But I haven't given up on them yet. So that's a carefully worded answer to a complicated situation. There are Trump supporters who are concerned about the climate genuinely and will take steps on it if approached correctly. And it's an open question how much energy is worth putting in that direction. So a little bit I'm wait and see, because they haven't actually succeeded in terms of what CCL should do. Because our focus really has to stay on climate and bipartisanship. But it's on my mind, I will say that. And the part that CCL can clearly do, there are some parts where places where we fit into this very clearly from our values. One is pulling out and getting to vote the environmentally minded folks who aren't voting. I think also reaching for the folks who are in the center and aren't voting is really important. That there's a set of folks who are getting labeled the exhausted majority. They don't feel like they belong to either party. They're not attracted to the Democratic Party. They're not attracted to the Republican Party, and they tend to check out. But another person I know calls them solutions voters, or looking for people with solutions. I think if you can find those people and bring them in and get them to stop just sitting on the couch, that they are the swing voters. They will help shift things also. And I also believe that part of what we do is continue using our democracy and being the kind of citizens that we want to have in this country, so that there are role models and examples and that inspiration and hope that, hey, there are still decent people doing the work of citizens. So that may or may not satisfy, but it's kind of the best I got at the moment for a very challenging situation.
Yeah. Okay, well, I take your point that they did not succeed in stealing the election, but a certain number of governors and secretaries of state are running on the platform of basically saying they will steal that state's electoral votes for the Republican candidate in 2024, which is a grave concern to me. But anyway.
Yes, yes.
I do appreciate the
saying is easier than doing, I hope.
Yeah, we hope.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Jen, go ahead.
That's a difficult decision. Our discussion. I wanted to turn to something a little more optimistic. One of our awesome volunteers, CCLers in Tennessee here, sent out a Atlantic article where in the Atlantic they actually put together all of the actions on a green economy that have taken place in the Biden administration: the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and this Infrastructure Act, and show that there will be $80 billion a year spent on a green economy, over the next several years through 2030. And it was very, very good news. And, I wanted to model that in inroads and see how much difference it makes and all that. But it's not just the IRA that's made a difference, is also the infrastructure, the inflation, the Infrastructure Act and the CHIPS Act that have made a big difference as well. And I wondered if you would speak to that, please.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. There was this little pause at the beginning where I was deciding what I was going to do and say, because a volunteer sent that, I get various things. A volunteer sent that out to some people and I was included on it. And I read that this morning and I was like, that was the most hopeful thing I'd actually read in a while, especially the part about all the climate and clean energy stuff that's in the CHIPS Act. And I had no idea. And it got bipartisan support. So that's in the chat now. I debated whether I was going to read some of that article to y'all at the start of the call, but I decided not to. So thank you for making sure we all knew about it. I really encourage you to read that. And again, that, you know, 2 of those 3 significant pieces of legislation were done with bipartisan support.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Jan. Eric, go ahead.
Hi, Madeleine. Thanks for taking the time. I thought it was interesting that the Inflation Reduction Act is projected to decrease carbon emissions by 40% over, I guess, the next 8 years by 2030. Because I recall that the carbon price, the fee and dividend, was projected to lower it by that same amount over 12 years, as I recall. And when I first saw that, I thought, well, this is interesting. It achieves CCL's goal, but by different means. And then I thought, well, I'm curious what the Venn diagram would look like if you took the 40% by the carbon fee and the 40% by the IRA. Is it a perfect circle? Is it like a half and half? If you were to combine the two, would it cut emissions by 80%? And I was curious if you know, like, to what extent should we still be thinking about and pressing for a carbon fee to add on to the gains from the IRA? Yeah.
First of all, you should be talking to Dana Nucitelli about those questions. He's remarkable. So I must have been really on my game this morning, because you keep raising things up that I was thinking about this morning on this call. And also you guys are really on your game. That to me is a central question. So the IRA does a bunch of stuff, you know, and Dana's Yale blog that I only got 2/3 of the way through lists the things in order of greatest impact. So the energy tax credits, you know, are a huge amount of those gains. So we're getting gains through a different mechanism, carrots, not sticks. And they count. And so then the question is, yes, you put a fee on top of that, what do you get? You know, and do you put a small additional fee to get like the next 10%? Or do you have to start with a big fee to get the next 10%? And let's just make sure the fee is the right thing. My layperson's guess from my history of CCL and talking about these things is that our proposal, you know, we started low and ramped up slow, but steady. And so what's missing is the things that drive the next chunk of emissions. And we would have done that, or will do it, depending on how you look at the world, with that steadily rising fee. But I think there's a lot of deep questions to be asked right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric. And Don put a link into Nerd Corner where you can direct questions to Dana in the chat. Emily,
you
go
guys
ahead.
are so sharp. Like the way we use the chat in this organization and the way links show up like while you're talking, I'm still stunned at this organization. Okay, go ahead, Emily.
Hey, everybody. Thank you, Madeleine and John and everybody. So I have like a sort of a nuts and bolts chapter leader question. And so maybe this is a question like for everyone and not just Madeleine, but it's kind of building on some of what Mark and Evan brought up, but like assuming this passes and we have a big victory, what are people thinking about in terms of chapter development and keeping people engaged and energized and recruiting new members if there's like sort of like a malaise in the general population that like, oh, we just had a big climate victory, like we don't need to think about this anymore right now. And, you know, people like us who are really engaged in climate action know that this is just the first step. Like this is a problem that I'm gonna have to be working on my whole life, probably. And so I just am worried about keeping the energy in my chapter and recruiting new members? Anyway, so that's kind of a question for everybody.
I love this question. I will share a few thoughts, but then I want to hear what other folks have to say. We're used to using policy to engage people, but I think I'm going to guess that for a lot of us who have been doing this for a long time, that a big chunk of what keeps us going are the friendships and relationships that we have. And so I think in terms of recruitment, if can be in the space of, we just had a victory, this is fun, we're going to do more, and here's what we're going to do, and here's how you can help. That's attractive. That's outside the malaise, and so I think it's how we are at this moment. Are we bitter and angry that there's some fossil fuel stuff in there, or that we didn't get a carbon fee, or are we like, hey, we got something, now let's go get some more? So that's my thought on it. It's as much who we are as anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what keeps me with CCL, because we're a community and I just love it so much.
Yeah. I mean, I watch you talk and I'm like, I'd want to be in your chapter, Emily.
We have
an awesome chapter.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Does anyone else want to add anything for Emily? Sylvia, go ahead.
Yeah, I think my answer fits in with a question that came up earlier about how do we work with the Republicans. This was passed only with Democrats. We have a lot of work still to do to get the Republicans on our side. And this is so important. This is a problem that needs to be solved by everybody. And so I just was at an event with my Republican congressman, who was one of those who did vote against the certifying the votes. And that didn't come up at this meeting that he was holding at Ag Progress Days. He's interested in agriculture. There's a lot that can be done through agriculture, and we can work with them on agriculture. We can work with them on other subjects, and we need them. It's not just that we can work with them, but that we must have them. And so if we get people to realize that and work on trying to get not just a small victory, but all of us working together, I think that's what we have to talk about.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Sylvia. Henry, go ahead.
Hey, Madeleine, and hello, everyone. I haven't been in CCL very long. I've only attended a couple of meetings first with the Delco chapter in Pennsylvania, and then in the Chester County chapter. I just wanted to ask what CCL's kind of philosophy on coalition building is, specifically with other groups that are kind of equally well organized and have similar strategies about reaching out to specific offices and different levels of government, both local and at the federal level. And what made me think of it was I've called both my House representative office and my senator office in the last week to ask that he vote for the IRA budget reconciliation. And I kind of thought to myself that, while I'm here asking them for something, I could have probably asked them for something else as well. And if there are other groups that have a similar strategy as us for other issues, then while they're calling for their thing, if we were sincere about supporting them and teaming with them, they could probably also be asking about what we're asking about. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, just because I am new, I would appreciate what coalition building looks like for CCL.
Yeah, there's several things in what you were saying that I want to hang on to in my mind. Taking the last one, all the advice we've gotten about calling members of Congress or even writing them is that they don't know how to cope with having more than one issue in a contact. And so putting them into one phone call, they can only check one box when you call. So my advice to you would be hang up and call back the next day with your second issue, or rewrite or whatever. We like coalition building, and we've done a lot of it, and it also can be complicated for us. So for example, some examples of really, of succeeding is like the faith-based conference that West Virginia held recently, where they did it with other groups and brought people in together, and really was grateful for that and for the work that went into that. And that also in the faith area, another example that goes back a while is that evangelicals that I was connected to, in particular at the time, Young Evangelicals for Climate Action and EEN and some other groups, they decided that they wanted to lobby on carbon fee and dividend. Well, that was an easy coalition for us. And we came and helped them run the lobby day and did the training. That was really, really great. Our DC team has done a lot of teaching people our lobby training methods and sharing that. Some of the coalition things that are difficult for us is that we're fairly unusual in that we are trying to figure out how to talk about things and frame them in ways that work across the aisle. And a lot of groups on the left, that's not their strategy. Their strategy is to figure out how to get Dems enough power to be able to get things done that they want to see done. And my own attitude about that is I don't want us to beat each other up about it. And in some ways, like as a climate concerned person, I'm just like, whatever strategy works, please. But I happen to believe very strongly that, like Sylvia, that we need to be pursuing this strategy. And so some coalition efforts are very hard for us to get involved in because they're too far to the left, basically, or too much bashing of the right. So we have to be really careful about it too. And that's hard sometimes. Because
that makes sense.
Some
Thank
people,
you.
it's like, it's your friends over there. So.
Thanks, Henry. Dana, go ahead.
So at the risk of blowing up scope, I mean, I think our overall goal is to get to net zero by 2050. But just doing the carbon fee and dividend really won't get us there. But like the European Union has like an interesting plan, like this Fit for 55, which is like them kind of talking about what is their pathway to net zero. And I guess I wonder, like, have we tried like thinking about sort of what are the different pathways to net zero, and like how could, and without totally losing our focus, maybe work with like other organizations, or sort of elevating it to like a more national issue, like, hey, we need a plan as a country to how do we get there. Like, it's, we've seen like a lot of good presentations in our conferences about different states, climate action plans, but I kind of feel like as a nation, we're kind of missing this.
Yeah, our politics as a nation make it very difficult when you have to legislate by throwing a lot of things into one gigantic bill in order to get it done. It like really makes it hard to have a thoughtful plan. I'm sympathetic to what you're suggesting, Dana. And the person I think who spends the most time keeping his pulse on that, well, too, I mean, when you talk about international, that's Joe Robertson. But in CCL, Tony Cerna really does have his mind on what are the different pathways, and so you could, and we are responsive to things we hear from people, and often get really great things like the Atlantic article the volunteer sent me. So I would send you over to him.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Warren, hang tight 1 second. I'm going to get to Bob and John, and we'll come right back to you. Bob, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to call attention to a little discussion in the chat about the fact that the talk of 40% reduction is with respect to 2005, and we were already, on a downward path, and so it sounds good to say 40% reduction, but it's really fairly misleading to say that, and I don't want to minimize that this was really a major thing that was done. And it's a great start, but it's pretty far from what we need, as other people have said. If you look at the IPCC reports, which are based on integrated assessment modeling, basically they say the world needs to spend about $1 trillion a year to address the problem. We're talking about 30 billion here. And it doesn't have to be all government. But I think it's good to keep that in mind. And I'm hopeful with this recent development, but we need about 5 times more or something like that than what we have. So I just want to, really, other people have put comments in the chat that are very relevant. I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And you're right. Tony Serna has been kind of coaching people to think in terms of talking about what the IRA bill does is it gets us, if we were roughly already heading to 30% reduction and our Paris goal is 50% reduction, then the IRA gets us halfway there. Yeah. And 50% reduction is not the end. Me not being the wonky person, I just keep saying, we're not done. We're not done. We're not done. We're not done. We're not done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about the IRA. I'm an EV advocate. I think that's safe to say. I'm charging in my Chevy Volt right now that I've had since 2011. And I know the provisions in the IRA are meant to promote EV adoption. They're weird. And I don't, just to toss this out for everyone's consideration and whoever wants to pay attention to this, but there are cars that will lose the tax credit. There may be fewer in the next year that are eligible for the tax credit than there are right now. I don't know if we're aware of that. It just seems to be, okay, tax credits for EVs, but it's North American made. So there's some very good Korean ones right now. I'm a Buy American guy, but that will lose their tax credit. So if you want one of those, you better go look at a EV6 right now. And then there's limitations on the value of the car. There are limitations on the income of the buyer. And there are limitations on not just the car being assembled here, but the batteries and the metals in the batteries eventually having to be American. So I just wanted to toss that out. It's a little bit odd.
Yeah, that caught my eye too recently, John, where I'm like, we're going to have to really look at what's going on with the implementation of that, because the tax credits are great if you can get them, but some of those provisions are out there on a limb. So that is going to take grassroots scrutiny and looking at the implementation. And I was quoting Rob Hogue from Iowa on the group leader call last night. If I can remember it, he was like, pass it, defend it, improve it, and build on it. And that it might be that's one of those places where it needs some improving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, there's some things that'll go through and make sense and get going pretty quickly, and then there's some things we're going to have to watch. And this is another sort of interesting new thing for us. Like, we've never had to think about implementing anything, to my knowledge, in CCL. And how much do we do that, or how much do we leave that to other groups to do? I don't know the answers to those questions. It's a different world, but you know, is it worth our time and energy to watch that, or should we be focused on the next thing? These are some interesting questions that I don't have fast answers to, even though I feel like y'all want fast answers some days.
Well, at CCL, I don't know, but as an individual, if anyone is interested in an EV, you're going to have to look carefully at the provisions of the law as far as which one, if you want to get the tax credit. Anyway.
Thank you for alerting people. Yeah.
Thanks, John. We have about 10 minutes left, Madeleine. So Beth, you want to go, and then Warren? Oh, you have to unmute, Beth.
You're muted, Beth.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you, Madeleine.
Hi,
good to see you. So a couple of things. One is I did put some things in the chat, like with Bill Shireman and the 6 pillars you mentioned. And I wanted to recommend his book, In This Together, which I just got done reading, which talks about the exhausted middle that you referred to. My suggestion for something we could do is I've been doing what Catherine Hayhoe talks about a lot, which is talking to people about climate change, like neighbors and friends and coworkers, especially with the heat this summer. And my challenge is I do 2 things. One is I try to really break it down and make climate change less wonky, because it can be very wonky. And, you know, that may be an area that we could work on in CCL, is like, how do you actually talk with people about what's in IRA and some of these other legislation that Jan mentioned. And then the other is I always add, when I talk to my friends about climate change, and it's bipartisan, and this is why. Because I think that doing those 2 things helps, especially in a red region like Appalachia, when a lot of our friends may be conservatives or have voted for Trump or whatever. Is really helpful to do those 2 things.
That's wonderful, Beth. I really like that you're talking to people, and because the more you do that, the more you learn from doing it too. You know, like you go, oh, that thing I just said made no sense to this person, or oops, I suddenly shut down the conversation. And so, yeah, it's practice.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Beth. Warren, go ahead.
Okay, Madeleine, I wanted to come back to the point about crafting the new policy direction for CCL, and the really excellent point that Sylvia made, which is, you know, if we could just get 20% of the Republican caucus to support climate efforts, that would make all the difference in the world to the success of our initiatives. So I could hardly think of anything more important than to, as we look at the new policy strategy for CCL, to consider how we could get Republicans in, whether it's with the border adjustment, or whether it's with clean energy, or some umbrella approach that would gather them, a few of them in, as well as keep the Democrats. That would make a huge difference in our success, I think.
I totally agree with you, Warren. Thank you for bolstering that inclination of mine.
Okay. Thanks, Warren. I don't see any other hands. I saw a couple questions in the chat, Madeleine. One from Chris Wiegard. Does the resemblance of the methane fee to carbon pricing increase the likelihood of a future path for carbon pricing to become law?
I believe it does. And I think our government affairs team thinks that that's very significant too. Yeah.
Great. From Emily, one about Reggie. Virginia is benefiting hugely from the funds that are coming in from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It's different, of course, but a carbon pricing mechanism. I wonder if, for Reggie states, if we could draw some parallels and ask people to imagine individuals getting the cash instead of the state.
That's intriguing. I think you're going to know more about that than me.
Okay. One from John. I think we should use our passion for lobbying to get the right people elected, as this will determine who we have to work with in the future. I feel this is paramount for moving forward with any kind of meaningful legislation.
You got a thumbs up from Bill Metler there. Yeah, you know, CCL will remain nonpartisan and not endorse candidates. So we ask, when you're doing work through your chapters, to do voter, help people get to the polls, help people be motivated to vote, work with Environmental Voter Project, which also has very clean communications dealing with nonpartisanship. But that does not in any way mean that you yourself as a member of the community can't go out and work for the person that you believe is best to get in there and do that. There may be some times when you want to, like for me, I'll just put it personally, like for me in my position, I don't think I can do anything that isn't seen as CCL, because I'm your executive director. So I'm not going to go out and campaign for somebody. But that doesn't apply to most of you. And so please do save some energy for us, and then come back after that's done and put some more energy into us. We need you, but please do participate in that way.
Great. Joe has one, opting to be optimistic and anticipating that the act will pass. I wonder how it will be implemented as time goes by. Will there be a need for annually budget allocations and swings in the makeup of the Congress affecting what is authorized on the future budgets for implementing the act?
What I would say generically is there's a lot of different moving pieces. So there might be some, but my sense is that, this has like 10-year funding for a lot of things. And so I don't know that they'll have to be reauthorized. That said, I also don't know that a future president who is hostile to some of it couldn't find a way to withhold the money. So let's get it moving as quickly as we can.
We have about 3 minutes left. Bill, go ahead.
Thank you, John. One thing that we're doing is we have a lot of chapter members that we don't see. There's about 740 on our roster, and we have a active group of around 40. So we are going into our own chapter and asking them to vote for climate conscious legislators, to make sure that they're registered and to vote for climate conscious legislators. And that's, I think, tipping of the hat to Environmental Voter Project, who pursues folks on the environmental piece. And I think
I'll just jump in there. I think you're
Sure.
fine, but refrain from naming who you think the climate conscious voters candidates are.
Right, and if they ask, we refer them to the League of Conservation Voters, who has a scorecard on environmental votes. And the scorecard, just between you, me, and the lamppost, is decidedly Democratic. They have the highest scores, and the Republicans don't. But we let the recommendation of LCV inform our members.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone in that. The ice gets thinner and thinner here, so some caution there. If you are seriously bringing Republican voters into your group, they will decide that you are a bunch of Democrats doing that, you know, and that you are taking a stand, most likely, like you run that risk. So this is one of my mantras. Everything's always more complicated than I think it is. But just try looking at it through the eyes of somebody who actually wants to vote Republican, and it might, and then decide, you know, is that the right direction for you? I'm not saying it is or it isn't. It's a little bit situational.
Fair enough, Madeleine.
Just one comment in favor of the League of Women Voters, who has an excellent voting guide. I think it's 411 it's called. Anybody who looked at that, it's a wonderful guide to all the different positions that are on your ballot. It's very good.
The League of Women Voters thickens the ice a little bit for you there, Bill, compared to the
Very
League
good.
of Conservation Voters.
Fair enough.
It is 8:30 Eastern time, so I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. If you haven't had any questions answered, we'd direct you to the forums on community. We're always monitoring those questions, and thank you all so much. Madeleine, I'm so glad you joined, because these are some tough questions. And
these are great questions. They reflect just dedication and knowledge and commitment. And I mean, you know, it's crazy that I do this like at the end of a long day, but I love doing this. This is the best part of my day, is being with you all. So thank you. You know, and your region and the ways you have come together and helped get through, particularly when the national spotlight is on one of your states. You're amazing. I applaud you. So, and invite me back to a regional conference someday.
Will do. Thank you again so much, Madeleine. And I'm going to put this recording on the Appalachia YouTube channel tomorrow, so you can go back and refer to anything that you miss. So thank you all so much for the work you're doing. I love you all, and have a great evening. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, John.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, Madeline.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
Madeline.
everybody.
Thanks, Madeline. Thanks, John.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Take care.
Woof, woof.
Thanks again, Madeline.
Thank you, Jen.